She was standing on the second rung of a stepladder, trying to reach a curtain rod that was just slightly too high. When the ladder shifted, I caught it before she fell, and in that half-second, her hand found my forearm and held on, and neither of us moved for a moment longer than we needed to. Her name was Margot. She was my ex-girlfriend's older sister, and I had driven 4 hours from Calgary to Edmonton on a Saturday morning because she said she did not know anyone else who owned a pickup truck. My name is Fletcher Alderman. I am 37 years old. I work as a structural estimator for a mid-sized construction firm based in Calgary, Alberta. I spend my days reading blueprints and calculating load tolerances and writing cost reports that nobody outside the industry will ever read. I am good at what I do. I am not the kind of man people describe as exciting. I have been told, more than once, that I am someone you appreciate gradually. I had been living alone in a 2-bedroom apartment in Beltline since my breakup with Sasha 2 years earlier. We were together for 3 years. No shared lease, or shared anything really by the end. The relationship ended the way a lot of things end quietly, the same way a fire goes out when there is nothing left to feed it. Sasha told me, over pasta she had barely touched, that she felt like she was always performing enthusiasm that I never matched. She was right in the way that a person can be right about a symptom without understanding the condition. I was not cold, I was just careful with things I could not afford to break. After she left, my life settled into the rhythm that all quiet people fall back on when the noise stops. I went to work, I came home, I cooked proper dinners, not because anyone was watching, but because it gave the evening a shape. I called my mother in Red Deer on Sundays. I ran along the Bow River on Tuesday and Thursday mornings, when the temperature was above -10, which in Calgary is not a given from November through March. I did not resent Sasha. I did not spend evenings cataloging what went wrong. I just accepted that I was someone she needed to leave to find out what she actually wanted. I had met Margot during those 3 years, the way you meet a girlfriend's family, across holiday tables and birthday dinners, briefly at the edges of things. She was 3 years older than Sasha, 38 when I knew her then, and she worked as a graphic designer for a small studio in Edmonton that did branding for nonprofits and arts organizations. She was quieter than Sasha in a way that stood out precisely because Sasha was never quiet. At family dinners, Margot would hold her wine glass in both hands and listen more than she spoke. She had a habit of angling her head very slightly when she was paying attention, like she was trying to catch the exact frequency of what you were saying. I remember one specific thing about her from those years. She always had a small sketchbook in her bag, one of those square moleskine ones with the elastic closure, and whenever conversation around her slowed, her hand would move to it without thinking, not to open it, just to rest her fingers against the cover. Like it was something she needed to know was still there. After Sasha and I ended, Margot disappeared the way people do when you were only ever attached to them through someone else. I assumed she thought of me the way I thought of her, as a peripheral figure from a chapter that had closed. There was no reason to think otherwise. Then, 14 months later, my phone buzzed on a Wednesday evening while I was reading in the living room. Unknown number, Edmonton area code. I almost let it go to voicemail. When I picked up, the voice on the other end was careful and slightly formal, the way someone sounds when they have rehearsed the opening sentence but are less sure about what comes after. Fletcher, it's Margot, Sasha's sister. I know this is out of nowhere. I said, it's fine. What's going on? She told me she had just accepted a position with a larger studio in Calgary. She was relocating in 3 weeks. She had already signed the lease on an apartment near Inglewood, but she had no one in Calgary who could help her move her things. A rental truck, a Saturday, a few hours. She said she remembered I had a pickup, and that I seemed like the kind of person who would not make a big deal out of helping someone. I stood in my kitchen for a few seconds after she said that, turning it over. Helping your ex-girlfriend's older sister move. It was the kind of thing that sounds strange when you describe it to someone else, but feels completely ordinary when it is happening. There was nothing in her voice that suggested anything beyond what she was saying. So I said yes. I drove up to Edmonton on the last Saturday of October. The highway was flat and gray and the sky was the color of old pewter. The kind of Alberta autumn morning that feels like the whole province is holding its breath before the first real snow. Margot's apartment was a second-floor unit in a quiet street in Garneau, above a frame shop. When I climbed the stairs and knocked, she opened the door in paint-stained jeans and a flannel shirt and looked faintly embarrassed, the way people do when someone from a different context sees their home for the first time. The apartment surprised me. It was sparse, in the way that felt chosen rather than accidental. Very few decorative objects, plants, several of them on every sill and corner, but nothing else that was purely ornamental. No photographs on the walls. What hung instead were her own prints, unframed, tacked at the corners, mostly typographic and abstract. One above the kitchen table was a dense grid of overlapping hand-lettered words in navy and rust. I stood in front of it for a moment before I helped carry anything. "What does it say?" I asked. "Different things," she said, "depending on where you start reading." We loaded her things in under 2 hours. She did not own much. A drawing table that dismantled into 4 pieces, flat files for her prints, boxes of design books, heavy, 2 plants wrapped in newspaper that she carried herself and would not let me touch, 1 medium box labeled kitchen, no television, no excess furniture. She lived like someone who had made a deliberate decision about what was worth carrying. On the drive south, we talked more than I expected, not about Sasha, about work, about Calgary versus Edmonton, about the design project she was moving here for, an identity overhaul for a network of Indigenous-owned cooperatives across the prairies. She talked about it with the specific excitement people only get when work aligns with something they actually believe in. I asked questions and meant them. She answered without performing. At one point, somewhere around Lacombe, the conversation went quiet for a long stretch, not the uncomfortable kind. The kind where the radio is low and the road is straight, and 2 people have simply run out of words for a while and do not feel the need to manufacture any. I noticed she had the sketchbook in her bag on the seat between us. Her fingers found it once without her looking down. Her new apartment in Inglewood was on the 3rd floor of a building half a block from the river. Smaller than the Edmonton place, but the windows faced east, and when the morning light came through in long flat rectangles across the hardwood floor, the room looked like it had been waiting for someone who knew how to use it. We got the heavy pieces in first. The drawing table, the flat files. I reassembled the table while she opened boxes in the kitchen. When I was done, I noticed the bracket on her bookcase was slightly off, one shelf sitting a degree or 2 lower than it should. She had not mentioned it. She did not seem like someone who complained about small things. I went back to my truck for my toolbox, adjusted the bracket, tested each shelf, put the tools away. When I came back in, Margot's was standing in the kitchen doorway watching me with a look I could not entirely read. "You did not have to do that," she said. "The shelf would have been uneven," I said. She looked at me for another half-second. Then she turned back to her box. Over the next 3 or 4 weeks, I found myself in Inglewood more than made logical sense. Her bathroom faucet was dripping, which I fixed in 20 minutes on a Thursday evening. She mentioned she could not figure out the dimmer switch on the living room light, which turned out to be a loose wire behind the plate, a 10-minute job. I brought dinner one night from a Viet Thai place on 9th that I knew well because she said she had not yet figured out the neighborhood. She made coffee from a ceramic pour-over she had clearly owned for years, and we sat on the floor of her mostly unpacked living room and talked for 2 hours without meaning to. There was nothing in those visits I could have pointed to and said, "This is what this is." It did not announce itself. But something was there, the way a change in weather is there before you can name it, the way the air changes before snow. I started noticing things. Margot knew I took my coffee black. She could only have learned that from a dinner at Sasha's parents' house years earlier, watching me wave off the cream without being asked. She knew I was left-handed despite being right-hand dominant, because I mentioned once reaching for something with my left hand first, and she said, without looking up from what she was doing, "You always do that." She knew I had studied civil engineering before switching to estimation, a detail I had mentioned once, briefly, at a Christmas dinner that she had left early. These were not things you hold on to by accident. You hold on to them because something inside you decided they mattered. She never made a point of knowing. She mentioned these things the way you would mention the weather, easily and without emphasis, as though it would be stranger not to know. One evening in November, we were on her small balcony in winter jackets, watching the city lights reflect off the river ice forming along the banks. She turned to me and said, in the tone someone uses when they are testing a sentence they have been composing for a while, "You've been here 6 times in a month. Do you know why?" I said I had been in the area. She smiled, very slightly, looking at the river. "Sure," she said. I did not understand what she was actually telling me. Not yet. A few days later, I was helping her organize the flat files in her studio corner of the living room. There were dozens of prints in various stages, some finished, some in progress, and tucked in among them, near the back of the bottom drawer, was a folder, craft paper, tied with a piece of twine. She reached past me and lifted it out before I could open it. Her movement was quick and deliberate, and her face did a thing I had not seen it do before. A small tightening, something controlled very quickly. "Old work," she said. "Not ready." Her voice was level. Her hands were not entirely. I did not push, but the folder stayed in the back of my mind. She was someone who curated everything she showed the world. Whatever was in that folder, she had decided very specifically that I should not see it. I was back at my apartment on a Thursday in late November, checking drawings on my laptop after dinner, when my phone lit up on the coffee table. I looked at the screen. Sasha. I had not seen that name on my phone in 14 months. Her voice when I answered was bright and clipped and deliberate, the way someone sounds when they have decided what they are going to say and practiced the opening. She asked, without any setup, how I was settling into the new routine. Then, before I could answer, she asked why I had been spending so much time with her sister. I told her the truth. I had helped Margot's move. I had stopped by a few times to help her get settled. That was it. Sasha laughed in the way she laughed when she was not really amused. "Fletcher," she said, "you are being very literal right now." Then she told me something. She said that Margot had a pattern of gravitate toward people who were unavailable or already spoken for, that there had been a situation years ago in Edmonton that had caused real tension in the family, a friendship that had gone badly sideways. She said she was not telling me this to cause problems, just to make sure I was going in with my eyes open. I knew Sasha. I had spent 3 years learning the architecture of how she operated. She was not a malicious person, but she was someone who organized the world around her own narrative and got uncomfortable when that narrative required revision. If Margot was happy in Calgary, if she had moved towards something real with someone Sasha had left, it would require Sasha to update a story she had already finished writing. And she preferred not to. I told myself it did not change anything, but it left something small and unsettled in me. The way a door left slightly open changes the temperature of a room. The next time I went to Margot's apartment, I was a half-degree different. I stood on the other side of the kitchen island instead of near her at the counter. I finished the task I had come to do, a curtain rod in the bedroom, and left before she had a chance to make coffee. I said I had an early site visit. She looked at me for a moment when I said it. The way someone looks at a sentence they suspect is not entirely true. She did not ask. She did not push or close the distance I had quietly installed between us. But something in her face changed in a way I recognized only much later, the particular expression of someone who has watched a specific door begin to close before and has learned, through long experience, that reaching for it makes no difference. 3 weeks later, Sasha came to Calgary. She did not tell either of us she was coming. She showed up at Margot's apartment on a Sunday afternoon. I was there, on the floor of the living room, helping reassemble a flat file that had partially collapsed. Margot opened the door and went very still when she saw her sister in the hallway, and something in the quality of the silence that followed told me this was not a surprise visit made out of warmth. Sasha walked in with her coat still on and stood in the center of the room, and the three of us formed a triangle that no one had arranged, but everyone understood. She looked at Margot, and she spoke the way someone speaks when they have planned this, when they have imagined the room and the blocking and the lines. "Tell him," she said. "Tell Fletcher that you moved to Calgary for a reason that had nothing to do with the job. Tell him you asked me about him 3 times in the first year, after we broke up when you thought I wouldn't notice. Tell him about the folder." Every word was factually true. I felt that even as she said them, but the truth was being used in a specific way, deployed rather than offered, and those are not the same thing. She was not revealing information. She was constructing a verdict. Margot stood perfectly still. She looked at her sister for a long moment. Then she looked at the floor. The room was so quiet I could hear the building's heating system. The kind of silence that does not feel empty but full of everything no one has yet said. Then she said very quietly, "You're not wrong about any of it, but you're saying it like it's a crime." She turned to me. Her voice was steady, which was more than I expected. She said she was sorry, not for what she had felt, but for not being honest with me about why she had called, why she had chosen Calgary, why she kept finding reasons to have me there. She said she understood if that changed things. She said it the way someone says something they have rehearsed late at night, when they could not sleep, in the quiet of their own apartment, when there was no one else to hear them get it wrong first. Then she crossed to the studio corner, opened the flat file, and pulled out the craft paper folder. She set it on the drawing table between us, and she walked out to the balcony and stood there with her arms around herself, facing the river. I opened the folder. Inside were a series of hand-lettered typographic prints, studies, loose ones, the kind you make when you are working through something, and threaded through several of them, embedded in the dense grids of overlapping text, was a name, not as a label, not as a title. As part of the texture of the work itself, Fletcher, sometimes in full, sometimes compressed into the letter forms of other words, F.A. layered into a word that started with something else. The hand lettering was small in places, integrated into the composition, so that you would not see it unless you were looking, or unless you already knew. She had been making work with my name inside it for longer than I had been in Inglewood. The dates on the back of 3 of the prints were from the year Sasha and I were still together. I stood there with the folder in my hands and looked at the river through the balcony door. Margot had her back to me. Her shoulders were pulled in. The afternoon light was low and orange. Sasha was watching me, waiting. I knew that posture, the weight of her expectation, the silent assumption that I would do what the situation seemed to be asking. A line with her reading of it confirmed that she had been right to warn me. I looked at her. I said, "You didn't come here to protect me, Sasha. You came here because if this is real, it means you were wrong about what you were leaving." She opened her mouth. She closed it. Something moved behind her eyes that was not anger, something older and less comfortable than anger. Then she picked up her bag and walked to the door and pulled it shut without a word. The latch clicked, the apartment went quiet. I carried the folder to the balcony. Margot did not turn around when she heard me come out. The air off the river was cold, carrying the particular mineral smell of ice and wet stone that Calgary gets in late November. The bow was flat and gray in the distance, the sky above it streaked with the last of the afternoon. I stood beside her and set the open folder on the railing in front of her. She looked at it for a moment without speaking. "How long?" I said. She was quiet long enough that I thought she might not answer. When she did, her voice was careful, even, like someone walking across ice they have tested once but are not entirely sure about. "The Christmas dinner," she said. "Sasha's parents' house, 3.5 years ago. You fixed the towel bar in the guest bathroom because it was coming out of the wall. Nobody asked you to. You just noticed it and went out to your truck and came back and fixed it and came to dinner like you had not been gone at all." She paused. The wind moved her hair. "Sasha complained on the way home that you spent 20 minutes in the bathroom," Margot said. I remember thinking that she was describing 2 completely different people. Then she told me the rest of it, slowly and in the wrong order, the way people tell things when they have carried them so long. They have lost the linear version. She had developed feelings for me during that year. She had said nothing because there was nothing to say. Sasha met me first. Sasha was confident and fast, and certain of herself in ways Margot had never been. Margot was the older sister who sat in the corner with a sketchbook and let the room happen around her. She had made a decision very quickly, the same evening of the towel bar, to say nothing and keep saying nothing for as long as it took. She sat through dinners and holiday weekends, and a birthday party for Sasha's mother, where I spent 40 minutes helping their father figure out a problem with the garage door opener. She sat on the opposite side of every table and made conversation and excused herself at reasonable hours and drove back up the highway afterward with her hands too tight on the steering wheel, angry at herself for the feelings and angrier at the timing. When Sasha and I broke up, Margot's had waited. Not strategically, just because she could not figure out what waiting was supposed to turn into. For 14 months she sat with it. Then the job in Calgary came up and she thought, for the first time, that maybe waiting had a shape after all. The phone call asking me to help her move, she could have hired someone. There are plenty of services in Edmonton that will wrap your flat files and load your drawing table for a flat rate. She knew this. She had moved twice before on her own, but she wanted a reason, a clean, uncomplicated, completely defensible reason to step back into proximity with me, without having to explain what she was actually hoping for. "I wasn't trying to pull you into something you hadn't chosen," she said. The river moved slowly below us. "I just wanted to be in the same city. I thought if I was in the same city, maybe something would become possible that wasn't possible at a distance." She said it was okay, whatever I needed. She had said what she needed to say, and she understood that that did not obligate anything. I stood there with my hands on the railing and looked out at the river. The cold was working its way through my jacket. I could feel it at my shoulders and along my forearms. And I was looking back through the past 3 months, through every detail I had not fully understood at the time. The coffee I always got without being asked. The shelf she had let me notice and fix without drawing attention to it. The way she had kept my name inside her work for years, embedded in the texture of things I was never meant to see. There was nothing calculating in any of it. What it was patient. Extraordinarily, quietly patient. The patience of someone who had decided that a thing was true and had simply waited to find out whether the world would eventually agree. "I don't see what Sasha wanted me to see," I said. "I see someone who hid a name inside her work for 3 years and never once asked anything in return." I picked up the folder from the railing. I held it back out to her. She looked at it, then at me. "Keep them," I said, "but don't hide anymore." I went home that night. I went to work the next morning. I ate lunch at desk and looked at the gray November sky over downtown Calgary and did not call anyone. 2 days passed exactly like that. On the third evening I sat at my kitchen table with my phone and typed, "Coffee this week." She replied 40 minutes later, 2 words. "Dark roast." I read it twice. Then I put the phone face down on the table and sat in the quiet for a while, and I was smiling, which surprised me more than I expected it to. What followed was slow, in the way things are slow when they are real. We did not manufacture occasion. There were no deliberate first dates, no restaurants chosen to impress anyone. I would stop at a small coffee spot on 9th Avenue before my morning sight walks when they took me near Inglewood. Margot would already be at a table, sketchbook open, reading glasses pushed into her hair. I would bring something from the bakery next door, a butter tart or a slice of lemon loaf. Always something different because I paid attention to what she actually ate versus what she ordered out of politeness. We would sit for 40 minutes and read or talk or do both at the same time in no particular ratio. Some evenings I cooked at her place because her kitchen was laid out better than mine, and the window above her sink faced west, and the light in that direction in the hour before dark was something I started looking forward to, without fully realizing I had. She would sit on the counter and work on something in her sketchbook while I cooked, and occasionally read something out loud, a sentence from a book she was going through. A line from a radio piece she had heard that week. I would listen and not comment immediately, because I had learned that with Margot's, the silence after she said something was part of the sentence. One evening in January, I was washing a pot after dinner, and she was drying and stacking, and I glanced over at the drawing table in the corner and saw her sketchbook lying open. I could see from across the room that she had added something to the page she had been working on when I arrived. A name, the way she had put names in the prints, tucked into the letter forms at the bottom corner where the composition had space. Fletcher. She did not know I had seen it. I did not say anything. I just put the pot on the rack and kept washing, and something in my chest settled into a position that felt different from anything I had felt in a very long time. Sasha called once more, in the spring. Her voice had changed again, something quieter in it, the edge that usually lived behind her words gone or at least resting. She asked without hostility if things were serious. I said yes. There was a pause. Then she said, "I think part of me knew she always liked you. I didn't want to know it, but I think I did." That was more honest than I had expected her to be. I did not know what to do with the honesty exactly, except to accept it. I thanked her and I meant it, and when I hung up I felt something I had not expected, not relief, not vindication, just a kind of clean stillness, like the silence after the last note of something long. We moved in together in the fall. Her apartment in Inglewood became ours. The flat files went against the east wall under the windows. My books joined her design books on the shelves, mixed together in the way books mix when two people stop organizing and just start living. The sketchbook went on the kitchen table because that was where she always wanted it, and now there was no reason to put it anywhere else. One evening in October, we were rearranging things to make room for a drafting lamp she had ordered, and we needed to move the flat files slightly. I was on the floor checking that the back feet were level when Margot crouched beside me and handed me the level from across the room. She held it out, left hand first. I looked at her. She looked back with the particular expression that meant she had not said anything and did not intend to. I took the level and checked the feet and did not say anything either, because some things are not for saying, they are for knowing, and knowing each other, knowing the left hand and the dark roast and the name pressed quietly into the corner of a composition, that had been the whole of it all along. I found the folder again months later. It had been moved to the shelf above her desk, no longer in the flat file. The prints were still inside and I did not open them, but tucked into the front cover, behind a sheet of glassine, was one new piece. Small format, maybe 15 centimeters square, the dense hand lettering she used when she was working something out for herself. I did not read every word. I did not need to, but in the bottom right corner, in lettering so small it was almost texture rather than text, were 2 words. He stayed. I slid the folder back. I closed the shelf. I walked back to the kitchen where the kettle was coming to a boil and the window was full of late afternoon light, and that was exactly enough.